I was 26 when I understood that the person you marry at 19 is often a reflection of who you needed to feel seen, not who you actually needed to become whole. My name is Aloan Grace, and for 7 years I believed that being chosen was the same thing as being loved. I believed that physical attraction could sustain a marriage. I believed that if I just tried harder, understood more, forgave more readily, I could turn a man who desired me into a man who truly saw me. It took becoming a mother to realize I had never really known myself at all. The day my daughter was born, I felt something ancient and enormous shift inside my chest. It was as if my entire body had been reorganized around this single, overwhelming truth. I would do anything to protect her. Anything. The love was immediate and ferocious, the kind that doesn't ask permission or wait for the right moment. It simply arrives and changes everything. But what I didn't expect was that protecting her would eventually mean protecting myself. The hospital room was dim when I woke up the second night. My body felt like it had been pulled apart and poorly reassembled. Everything ached in ways I hadn't known were possible. Mila was asleep in the bassinet beside me, her tiny chest rising and falling in that miraculous, terrifying rhythm that new mothers watch obsessively, afraid that if they look away, it might stop. Cashin was in the chair by the window, his phone casting a pale glow across his face. He had always been handsome, the kind of handsome that makes people stop mid-sentence when he walks into a room. Sharp jawline, dark hair that fell just right without effort, eyes that seemed to promise something exciting just beneath the surface. When I met him, I was 18 and had never been looked at the way he looked at me. It felt like being chosen for something important. He glanced up from his phone and smiled. Not at me, really. At the idea of me, maybe. At the woman who had just given him a child. There was satisfaction in that smile, something proprietary. "How are you feeling?" he asked, standing and moving toward the bed. I tried to shift my weight and gasped. The pain was still so present, so consuming. Like I've been through a war. He laughed softly, as if I had made a joke. "You're amazing. You know that? You did so well." His hand touched my leg through the thin hospital blanket. Not comforting. Not gentle. Something else. "The nurse said I should rest as much as possible," I said, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. "Of course," he said, but his hand didn't move. "I just missed you." There was something in his tone, something expectant. I felt my entire body tense, a warning system I had learned to ignore over the years suddenly screaming at full volume. "Cashin, I just gave birth yesterday." "I know." His hand moved higher. "I'm not asking for much. Just to feel close to you." I stared at him, at this man I had married, at the father of the child sleeping 3 feet away, and felt something crack open inside me. Not my heart breaking. Something deeper. A foundation I hadn't known was already unstable. "No," I said. He blinked. "What?" "No. I'm saying no." The silence that followed was dense and uncomfortable. He withdrew his hand slowly, his expression shifting through confusion, then irritation, then something that looked almost like disgust. "I've been here with you through everything," he said quietly. "I've been supportive. I held your hand through labor. I haven't complained once." As if those things were transactions. As if support and presence were currencies he had invested, and now he was waiting for his return. "I need to rest," I repeated, and this time I turned my face away from him. He stood there for a long moment. Then he picked up his jacket. "I'm going to get some air. I'll be back later." The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a slam. I lay there in the dark, listening to my daughter breathe, and felt tears slide down my temples into my hair. Not because I felt guilty. Because I felt something worse. Relief. Relief that he had left. Relief that I didn't have to manage his disappointment while my body was still healing from the most intense physical experience of my life. And beneath the relief, something cold and clear was beginning to form. A question I had been avoiding for years. What have I been doing? The next morning, the doctor cleared me to go home earlier than expected. My recovery was progressing well, she said, and there was no medical reason to stay. I should have been happy. Instead, I felt a low hum of dread as Cashin loaded our things into the car. He had been cheerful all morning, as if the previous night had never happened. That was his pattern. Push, retreat, reset. Act as if the boundary I had set was a small misunderstanding rather than a clear refusal. I had learned over the years that arguing about these moments only led to circular conversations where I ended up apologizing for not being more understanding. Mila was strapped into her car seat, still so impossibly small, her eyes closed, her fists curled near her face. I sat in the back beside her, watching her sleep, feeling that fierce protection swell in my chest again. Our house was a small rental on the edge of town, a 2-bedroom with a front porch that Cashin had promised to fix up but never had. When we pulled into the driveway, something felt wrong. Not dramatically wrong, just slightly off, like when you walk into a room and know someone has been there even though nothing is obviously disturbed. Cashin carried the bags inside while I unbuckled Mila, lifting her carefully against my chest. She stirred but didn't wake. I followed him through the front door, moving slowly because every step still hurt. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Cashin had stopped in the hallway, his body rigid. He turned to look at me, and his face had gone pale. "Stay here," he said. But I didn't stay. I moved past him, down the hall toward our bedroom, some instinct pulling me forward even as my rational mind tried to construct innocent explanations for why the bedroom door was closed when we had left it open. I pushed the door. The scene that greeted me was not explicit. It was simply undeniable. A woman I vaguely recognized, one of Cashin's coworkers from the tech company where he worked, was pulling on her shirt, her face flushed. The bed was unmade in a way that told a story. Cashin's cologne hung heavy in the air. Mila made a small sound against my chest, and both of them turned to look at me. The woman's eyes went wide. Cashin's coworker. I had met her at a company barbecue 6 months ago. She had complimented my earrings. No one spoke. I stood there, holding my newborn daughter, my body still bleeding and healing from bringing her into the world, and watched this woman gather her things with trembling hands. Cashin finally moved, stepping in front of me as if to block my view. "Aloan, wait. Just wait. Let me explain." I looked at him. Really looked at him. At the face I had kissed 1,000 times, the face I had studied in the dark, the face I had convinced myself I loved. "Get out of my way," I said. My voice was calm. That's what surprised me most. No screaming. No hysteria. Just a flatness that came from some deep, untapped place. He moved. The woman brushed past us both, murmuring something that might have been an apology, and I heard the front door open and close. Cashin started talking immediately. The words came fast, overlapping, desperate. It didn't mean anything. It was a mistake. He was stressed. I had been gone. He loved me. He loved Mila. This would never happen again. I walked to the bathroom, still holding my daughter, and closed the door. I sat on the floor, my back against the tub, and arranged Mila carefully in my arms so she wouldn't be disturbed. She slept on, oblivious, perfect. Then I let myself cry. I cried for an hour. Maybe longer. Time felt strange and elastic. Cashin knocked twice, called my name, begged me to come out so we could talk. I didn't answer. When the tears finally stopped, I felt hollowed out and strangely clear. I had been 26 years old for only 4 months, but sitting on that bathroom floor, I felt ancient. As if I had been sleepwalking through my own life and had just woken up in a place I didn't recognize. How did I get here? The question opened something, and suddenly I was remembering. I met Cashin Cole when I was 18 years old, a freshman in college, still trying to figure out who I was supposed to be. He was 24, working in tech, confident in a way that felt magnetic to someone like me, who had spent most of her teenage years feeling invisible. We met at a coffee shop near campus. He was sitting alone, working on his laptop, and when I walked past his table, he looked up and smiled. Not a polite smile. A smile that said he saw something he wanted. "You look like someone who has strong opinions about coffee," he said. It was such a stupid line, but I laughed. And that was all it took. Within 2 weeks, we were inseparable. He called me constantly, showed up at my dorm, planned elaborate dates that made me feel like the main character in some romantic story. My friends were impressed. My roommate said she had never seen me so happy. But there were small things even then. Small moments that I smoothed over because I wanted so badly to keep feeling chosen. Like the time I told him I wanted to wait before sleeping with him. I had been raised with certain values around intimacy, and even though I wasn't particularly religious, I wanted my first time to mean something. I wanted to be sure. He listened, nodded, said he understood. Then, 2 weeks later, after a party where we had both been drinking, he pressed me. Not violently. Not cruelly. Just persistently. "If you really loved me, you wouldn't make me wait," he said, his hands on my waist, his mouth against my ear. "Don't you want to make me happy?" I gave in. Afterward, lying in his bed, I felt strange and disconnected from my body. He fell asleep almost immediately, his arm heavy across my chest. I stared at the ceiling and told myself this was normal. This was what love felt like. The discomfort would fade. It didn't fade. It just became familiar. Over the next year, the pattern repeated. I would express a boundary, something I wasn't comfortable with, and he would listen just long enough to make me believe he respected it. Then he would return to the subject, gently at first, then with increasing frustration, until I gave in because it was easier than arguing. Easier than disappointing him. Easier than risking that he would leave and I would be alone again. My friends started to pull away. Not dramatically. Just gradually. They stopped inviting me to things because they knew I would say no if Cashin wasn't included, and including him meant centering our plans around his preferences. When I turned 19, he proposed. We were in his apartment, eating takeout, watching television. He didn't get down on one knee. He just turned to me during a commercial break and said, "We should get married." I laughed, thinking he was joking. He wasn't joking. "I'm serious," he said. "Why wait? We're good together. You make me happy. I can take care of you." I was 19 years old. I hadn't finished my sophomore year of college. I barely knew what I wanted to study, let alone who I wanted to become. But he was looking at me with such certainty, such confidence, and I felt that old familiar pull. The fear of being left behind. The fear of disappointing him. The fear of saying no and discovering I wasn't actually brave enough to be alone. "Okay," I said. We got married 3 months later at a courthouse. My parents didn't approve, but they came anyway, their faces tight with worry they tried to hide. My mother hugged me afterward and whispered, "Are you sure this is what you want?" I told her I was sure. I wasn't sure. But I was married, and I told myself that married people made it work. They chose each other every day. They worked through problems. They grew together. Except we didn't grow together. I just grew smaller. I dropped out of college after my second year because Cashin said it didn't make sense to pay tuition when I could work and contribute to our household. He didn't phrase it as a demand. He phrased it as logic, as practicality, as us being a team. So I got a job as a receptionist at a dental office and told myself I could always go back to school later. Later never came. Instead, days became weeks, became years. I worked. I cooked. I cleaned. I managed Cashin's moods, learned which topics to avoid, which requests to anticipate before he had to ask. I became fluent in the language of making myself small enough to fit into the shape he needed. And I told myself this was marriage. This was what it meant to be a good wife. When I got pregnant, I thought maybe things would shift. Maybe becoming parents would create some new foundation, something sturdier than what we had built so far. Instead, my pregnancy seemed to irritate him. My body changed in ways I couldn't control. I was tired constantly. I couldn't eat certain foods without getting sick. I needed more rest, more patience, more gentleness. Cashin treated these needs as inconveniences. "When will you be back to normal?" he asked one night when I told him I was too exhausted for intimacy. "I'm growing a human," I said, trying to make it light, trying to soften the truth. "This is normal right now." He sighed, turned away, picked up his phone. I lay there in the dark, my hand on my growing belly, and felt my daughter move inside me. A flutter, then a kick. She was real. She was coming. And I realized with sudden, terrible clarity that I was going to have to be strong enough for both of us. But I didn't know yet what that strength would cost. Mila finally woke in my arms, making small, hungry sounds. I stood slowly from the bathroom floor, my legs stiff, my body aching. When I opened the door, Cashin was sitting on the bed, his head in his hands. He looked up when I emerged, his eyes red. "Can we please talk?" he asked. I didn't answer. I went to the nursery, the small second bedroom we had painted pale yellow, and sat in the rocking chair. I fed Mila, watching her tiny face, her perfect concentration, and felt that fierce protection surge through me again. This child would not grow up watching her mother make herself smaller. She would not learn that love meant tolerating disrespect. She would not believe that being chosen was more important than choosing yourself. When Mila was fed and changed and sleeping in her crib, I returned to the bedroom. Cashin was still sitting in the same position. "I'm calling a lawyer," I said. "I want a divorce." He looked up sharply. "What?" "No. Eloan, we can work through this. I made a mistake, but that doesn't mean we throw away our marriage." "You didn't make a mistake," I said quietly. "You made a choice. You chose to bring another woman into our bed while I was in the hospital having your child. That wasn't confusion. That wasn't a moment of weakness. That was you showing me exactly who you are. That's not fair. You don't know what it's been like for me. You've been so focused on the pregnancy, on preparing for the baby. I felt invisible." The absurdity of that statement was so enormous, I almost laughed. I had been growing and then birthing a human being, and he had felt invisible. "Pack your things," I said. "Go stay somewhere else. I don't care where. But you're not staying here tonight. This is my house too. Then I'll leave." I moved to the closet, started pulling clothes off hangers with shaking hands. My body was screaming at me to stop, to rest, but I couldn't be in this room with him for another minute. "Wait," he said, standing. "Stop. I'll go. Just please, don't do anything drastic right now. You're exhausted. You're emotional. Give it a few days, and then we can talk when you're thinking more clearly." The condescension in his voice was so familiar I had almost stopped noticing it. Almost. "I've never thought more clearly in my life," I said. He stared at me for a long moment, as if waiting for me to break, to soften, to apologize for being unreasonable. I didn't. Finally, he grabbed a bag from the closet and started throwing clothes into it. He moved through the room with angry efficiency, slamming drawers, muttering under his breath. When he was finished, he stopped in the doorway and looked at me one last time. "You're going to regret this," he said. "You think you can do this alone? Raise a baby by yourself? You have no idea how hard it's going to be." "Harder than this?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just left. I stood in the bedroom, listening to his car start and pull away, and then I walked back to the nursery. I looked down at Mila, sleeping peacefully in her crib, her little chest rising and falling. "It's just us now," I whispered. "And we're going to be okay." I didn't know if that was true, but I knew I was going to make it true. The first few weeks were brutal. Not because I missed Cashin. I was surprised by how little I missed him. What I missed was the idea of him, The fantasy I had built over 7 years that if I just loved him enough, tried hard enough, understood him deeply enough, he would transform into the partner I needed. But he was never going to transform. Because he didn't think he needed to. What made those weeks brutal was the sheer physical and emotional weight of early motherhood combined with the practical realities of separating a life. I found a lawyer through a recommendation from a woman at work. Her name was Patricia, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who listened to my story without judgment and then laid out exactly what I needed to do. File for divorce. Establish custody arrangements. Divide assets, though we had very few. Figure out child support. Cashin fought me on everything. Not because he wanted custody of Mila. He had barely held her, barely changed a diaper, barely gotten up during the night when she cried. He fought me because he was angry that I had left, angry that I had stopped playing the role he needed me to play. His lawyer sent letters painting me as unstable, as making rash decisions while emotionally compromised. They suggested I was suffering from postpartum depression and couldn't think rationally. Patricia shut that down quickly. Medical records, testimonies from friends, documentation of Cashin's behavior. The truth was simple and clear, and no amount of legal maneuvering could obscure it. The divorce took 6 months to finalize. 6 months of paperwork and mediation and lawyers' fees I could barely afford. 6 months of Cashin showing up unannounced, trying to convince me to change my mind, oscillating between apologies and accusations. But I held firm. And slowly, something began to shift inside me. I started to remember who I had been before I met Cashin. Or rather, I started to discover who I might have been if I had given myself permission to grow. I had always loved reading, but I had stopped because Cashin found it boring when I wanted to talk about books. So I started reading again. Late at night, while Mila slept, I would curl up on the couch with a novel and lose myself in other people's stories. It felt like coming home to a part of myself I had abandoned. I had always been interested in photography, but I had never pursued it because Cashin said it wasn't practical. So I bought a used camera and started taking pictures. Nothing fancy. Just moments. Mila sleeping. Light coming through the kitchen window. Frost on the grass in the early morning. I had always wanted close friendships, deep conversations, connections that felt real. So I reached out to old friends I had drifted away from, and some of them reached back. We met for coffee. We talked about real things, not just surface pleasantries. I remembered what it felt like to be seen. My mother came to visit often, bringing food and help and careful, unspoken support. She never said, "I told you so." She just showed up, held her granddaughter, and made sure I ate. One afternoon, while Mila was napping and my mother was folding laundry, she said, "You seem different." Different how? I asked. More yourself, she said simply. I thought about that for a long time after she left. Was I more myself? Or was I just finally becoming someone I could recognize? The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in October. I signed the papers in Patricia's office, and that was it. 7 years dissolved into a legal document. Cashin had agreed to minimal child support and supervised visitation, though he rarely took advantage of it. He had already moved on, I heard through mutual acquaintances. Already dating someone new. Already constructing a different version of the story where I was the one who had given up on us. I didn't care. I was free. People asked me constantly if I was dating. Friends, coworkers, even strangers who learned I was a single mother. The assumption was always that the goal was to find someone new, to fill the space Cashin had left. But I didn't want to fill that space. I wanted to sit with it. I wanted to understand it. I started therapy, something I should have done years earlier. My therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Reyes, helped me see patterns I had been blind to. How I had learned early to equate my worth with being wanted. How I had confused intensity with intimacy. How I had given away my power piece by piece because I thought that was what love required. "You were so young," Dr. Reyes said during one session. You were still figuring out who you were, and you met someone who seemed so certain. It makes sense that you trusted his certainty more than your own uncertainty. But I ignored so many red flags, I said. Everyone could see it. Why couldn't I? Because you wanted to be chosen, she said gently. And when someone chooses us, especially when we're young and unsure, it feels like proof that we matter. It's hard to walk away from that, even when the cost is high. I cried a lot in those therapy sessions. Not sad tears, exactly. More like release. Years of held breath finally exhaling. Mila grew. She learned to smile, to laugh, to reach for things. She started sleeping through the night. She became a person, curious and bright and funny. I took her everywhere. To the park, to the library, to the grocery store. I talked to her constantly, narrating the world, showing her everything I could. And in showing her the world, I rediscovered it myself. I started noticing things I had stopped noticing. The way morning light changed colors depending on the season. The smell of rain on concrete. The sound of leaves crunching underfoot. Small, beautiful things that didn't require permission or approval. I also started noticing my own strength. Strength wasn't what I thought it was. It wasn't loudness or hardness or never feeling afraid. It was getting up every morning even when I was exhausted. It was asking for help when I needed it. It was setting boundaries and holding them even when it was uncomfortable. It was choosing my daughter's well-being and my own over the comfort of familiarity. One evening, when Mila was about a year old, I was sitting on the floor with her, stacking blocks, when she knocked them down and laughed with pure, delighted joy. I laughed too, and in that moment, I realized something fundamental. I was happy. Not happy in the frantic, desperate way I had tried to convince myself I was happy with Cashin. Not happy because I had achieved some perfect life or figured everything out. Just happy. Present. Content. Years passed, and life continued to unfold. Mila started preschool. I got a promotion at work. I took a photography class and discovered I was actually good at it. I made new friends, women who understood what it meant to rebuild yourself after realizing you had been living someone else's version of your life. Cashin faded into the background. He paid child support sporadically and saw Mila even less frequently. When he did show up, it was clear he saw her as an obligation rather than a joy. Mila seemed to sense this, and by the time she was 4, she was asking fewer questions about why Daddy wasn't around. I didn't badmouth him to her. I didn't need to. I just showed her, through my actions and my choices, what it looked like to respect yourself. People still asked about dating. Some even tried to set me up. But I wasn't interested. Not because I was damaged or afraid or nursing old wounds. Simply because I had spent so many years trying to be what someone else needed that I wanted to spend time being what I needed. And what I needed was space. Space to grow. Space to discover. Space to be whole without having to split myself in half to make room for someone else's expectations. Maybe someday I would be interested in partnership again. Maybe I would meet someone who saw me as I actually was and loved that person instead of some imagined version. Maybe. But maybe wasn't a source of anxiety anymore. It was just possibility, open and undemanding. One Saturday morning, when Mila was 5, we went to the park. She ran ahead to the swings, her hair flying behind her, her voice bright with excitement. I sat on a bench and watched her, this fierce, joyful, confident little person who had somehow come from me. A woman sat down beside me, also watching her own child play. We smiled at each other in that way mothers do, acknowledging the shared experience. "How old is yours?" she asked. 5, I said. "Yours? Just turned 6. First grader." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. "Is her father in the picture?" the woman asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. "Sorry, that's invasive. You don't have to answer." "It's okay," I said. "Not really. He's around occasionally, but not consistently." She nodded. Same with mine. Sometimes I wonder if it would be easier if he was just completely gone instead of showing up randomly and disappointing her. Maybe, I said. But I try to think of it this way. She's learning that people don't always show up the way we hope they will. And she's also learning that she has a parent who always shows up. That matters more. The woman smiled. That's a good way to look at it. Mila ran back to me, breathless and glowing. Mommy, did you see how high I went? I saw, I said, pulling her close. You were flying. She giggled and ran back to the swings. The other woman stood to follow her son. Nice talking to you, she said. You too, I replied. I stayed on that bench for a while longer, watching my daughter play, thinking about the girl I had been at 18. The girl who had believed being chosen was the most important thing. The girl who had given away pieces of herself to keep someone else happy. I wished I could go back and tell her that being chosen isn't nearly as important as choosing yourself. I wished I could tell her that love without respect is just pretty wrapping paper around an empty box. I wished I could tell her that the red flags she was ignoring wouldn't disappear just because she wanted them to. But I couldn't go back. All I could do was move forward and teach my daughter the lessons I had learned too late. That her worth wasn't determined by whether someone wanted her. That boundaries weren't mean or selfish. They were necessary. That saying no was just as powerful and important as saying yes. That she didn't need to make herself smaller to make someone else comfortable. That real love expanded you instead of diminishing you. And that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from something that's not working, even when everyone around you is telling you to stay and try harder. Mila came running back, her face flushed with happiness. Can we get ice cream? She asked. Absolutely, I said, taking her small hand in mine. We walked out of the park together, her chattering about the swings and the slides and a friend she had made. I listened, present and attentive, not thinking about the past or worrying about the future. Just here. Just now. Just us. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Looking back now, I can see the entire arc of those years with clarity I didn't have while living them. I can see how young I was, how desperate to be loved, how willing to ignore my own instincts in service of someone else's needs. I can also see how much courage it took to leave. Not just the dramatic moment of walking away, but all the small, daily acts of courage that followed. Waking up alone. Making decisions alone. Facing judgment and questions and well-meaning advice. Sitting with uncertainty. Building something new from nothing. People often talk about leaving as if it's a single moment of strength. But it's not. It's 1,000 tiny moments of strength compounded over time until finally you look around and realize you've built an entire life that belongs to you. That's what I want people to understand. If you're reading this or listening to this and you see yourself in any part of my story, I want you to know something. Those red flags you're ignoring won't disappear. That person you keep making excuses for won't change just because you love them enough. That discomfort you feel when you set a boundary and they push past it is your intuition trying to protect you. Listen to it. Being chosen isn't the achievement you think it is. The real achievement is choosing yourself, even when it's hard, even when it's lonely, even when everyone around you thinks you're giving up too easily. You're not giving up. You're waking up. And waking up is painful. It requires looking at truths you've been avoiding. It requires admitting you were wrong about things you were certain about. It requires grieving not just the relationship, but the version of yourself who accepted less than you deserved. But on the other side of that pain is something extraordinary. Freedom. Not the dramatic, cinematic freedom where you suddenly have all the answers and your life is perfect. The quiet, steady freedom of knowing yourself. Of trusting yourself. Of building a life that reflects your actual values instead of someone else's expectations. That's the freedom I found. That's the freedom I'm still finding every single day. And that's the freedom I want for my daughter and for anyone who needs to hear this. You deserve more than being tolerated. more than being desired, more than being convenient. You deserve to be seen, respected, and valued exactly as you are. And if the person you're with can't or won't do that, then the most loving thing you can do for yourself is walk away. Not because you're giving up on love, because you're finally understanding what love actually means. It took me 7 years and a broken marriage and becoming a mother to learn that lesson. But I learned it, and now I get to live it. That's my story. That's my truth. And if any part of it resonated with you, if any part of it made you think about your own life, your own choices, your own boundaries, then I hope you'll sit with that feeling instead of pushing it away. Because the small voice inside you that says something isn't right, that voice that you've been ignoring because it's easier to hope things will improve, that voice is telling you the truth. Listen to it. Choose yourself. You won't regret it.